Good evening, members. It's 6 o'clock, so I think we will make a start. Welcome to this meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee. It's the first one since November. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Coleridge, Councillor Bowers. I don't know if Councillor Wrench is running late, but those are the two apologies I have. Just before I move on to declarations of interest, I just want to say a couple of words about David Hume, who very sadly passed away recently. David was a member of this committee, and I know he took that responsibility very seriously. I also know from speaking to him that he made great efforts to turn up here, even when sometimes he wasn't feeling terribly well. But he did really make the effort, and I know we all miss him very much. Some very nice tributes were paid to him at full council, but I just wanted to mention him this evening because he was a member of this committee. Right, moving on. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do I have any? Not seeing any hands up. Fine. Minutes of previous meeting. The minutes are for the meeting held on the 24th of November, so I say that was about 4 months ago. The items discussed were the A12A120 widening scheme and also the local development scheme update. Do I have any comments on that? And if not, could I have a mover and seconder, please, that they are correct? Thank you, Councillor Butler and Councillor Mrs. Parker. Thank you. Public question time. We have nobody registered to speak this evening, so we'll move on to item 5, the first of the reports, which is the Health and Wellbeing Impact Assessment, which is going to be presented by Alan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to provide members with a bit of background, local plan policy LPP 49 concerns health and wellbeing impact assessments. Under this policy, developers are expected to ensure that new development promotes good health in developments which are over a certain threshold and for hot food takeaways. Under this policy, if significant adverse health and wellbeing impacts are identified, planning permission should be refused unless infrastructure or funding is provided to meet the health service requirements of that development. The purpose of the guidance note, which is set out in Appendix 1, is to enable developers to assess their proposals, to identify any health and wellbeing issues and come up with any solutions to deal with those issues identified. The guidance note proposes a similar approach to that used by sustainability appraisals and strategic environmental assessments, in that there are a number of key areas which can be assessed, such as location, health or transport. It should be noticed this isn't a inclusive list. There could be other issues that could become apparent during the planning process. And what they do is they take those different areas, and it is proposed that the rating, they're either rated between significantly positive all the way down to significantly negative impact. The guidance note also suggests that what impacts there could be on health and wellbeing, and as well as suggesting some potential mitigation or enhancement measures that could be used. The guidance note also signposts developers to other guidance on this issue, which can help in the formulation of HIAs, such as that provided by the Essex Design Guide, and some guidance that was produced by Public Health England, which I believe now is the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, I think. What it is proposed to do is that the HIA would be submitted at an early stage of a planning application or a pre-app. Then that would give the opportunity for those issues to be discussed and potential solutions to be found. So once agreed at this meeting, the guidance will be made available on the Council's website. It's also proposed that it would be added to the Council's validation list for planning or for relevant planning applications. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I think personally it's certainly very helpful to have this as a checklist for developers and agents. A number of the issues on here particularly come up quite regularly at Planning Committee when we're discussing applications. So I think to have this in advance, certainly as part of pre-app discussions, would be very helpful. Yes, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I agree with that. Does this cover the thorny issue of Section 106 from major developments for health services? Because whilst it's very useful to have this, we remain in the situation where thousands of houses have been given planning permission, particularly in West Midlands East around it, and we have not seen any actual expansion of health facilities, and the situation is getting worse and worse. It's all very well we say, well, we're going to, fill a checklist in and require contributions, but what about delivery? I mean, does this help with the delivery at all?
We would hope that this would help identify any health issues. We do ask and require appropriate contributions. We are, however, limited by what the NHS actually asks for in terms of contributions. But the guide will help identify if there is an existing shortfall, and then it is really up to the NHS to actually ask us for that funding to actually help meet that shortfall.
I think the problem is the area I've referred to. I think every single major application says there's a shortfall.
Just to add to that, as a result of the recent scrutiny committee into Section 106, and as discussed at last council, a letter, if it hasn't gone already, it is about to, from myself and from Councillor Radley, who chaired that scrutiny committee, has gone to, and I can't remember exactly who it is, but very senior NHS person, pointing out that the contributions we get towards health are, we think, not enough, and it is difficult to implement them when you're waiting for more to come in to build up a bigger amount and so on. I will make sure that letter is actually circulated to all members. I'm not sure it's actually gone out yet. I know I've approved it, and I think Councillor Radley was happy with the wording. So I'm hoping that might produce an improvement, but it'll be interesting to see what answer we get back. Anyone else? Yes. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you. Just a question really, well, two questions. First of all, when you're talking about health here, are you talking about public health, or are you talking about the provision of health services? And I would include, it's not really clear what the definition of health services. Would there be any definition of what you have to? I mean, would you, for example, have to say whether there are dentists in the area? So that's the first question. I mean, I know it's obviously required under the terms of the local plan, but it is pretty extensive, the list. I personally would not, it obviously creates quite a burden on developers to produce all this, what they would call red tape. And without wanting necessarily to try to make life easy for developers, I just, are we being, I mean, is it excessive to ask for the health impact assessment to include something on recycling? Is it necessary to include something on climate change? It seems to me that the items that are included in that list are sort of straying well beyond health, actually. And obviously there is public health, but are we including all sorts of? I mean, are we going beyond the normal remit of public health? Thank you.
Yes, Alan, would you like to come back on those?
Thank you. So when we refer to health, we're referring to all forms of health. So that would be sort of health services. That would also be providing opportunities for people to become healthier as well. The NHS is very much moving us towards a sort of a joint services approach where they will have facilities co-located with community halls. They would refer people to things like exercise, mental health services, things like that, all within that, all under that umbrella. So the list in Table 1, that is a suggested list of items that could be considered. Climate change can have quite a significant, or potential for quite significant impact on a person's health. Not necessarily directly, but when you have things like sort of transport emissions, which I think is one of the biggest emissions you have, that doesn't just impact on climate change, that can also impact on a person's health. So we ask people developers to look at that in terms of sort of road layouts or providing alternative means of transport, that sort of thing, and encouraging sort of more walking, cycling, which in itself is a health or potential health benefit for people as well. So I think, it is a very broad subject to cover. In terms of it being a burden, there is the health impact assessment is only for developments over a certain size, so it's not going to be sort of affecting the small, medium-sized builders, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it is something that is quite necessary. The NPPF has significantly strengthened its stance since the 2012 NPPF on what we can actually ask for. National Planning Practice Guidance, which was, I believe, updated in 2019, has also included quite an extensive list of subjects that you can or you should try and provide within a health impact assessment. We're just trying to encompass all of those within this guidance note. So it should be noted that it is a guidance note, it's not a supplementary planning document, but it is something that is intended to help steer decisions and identify problems at an early stage and hopefully address those problems to the benefit of the public.
Thanks, Alan. I think Councillor Parker, actually, for me, I don't think it's an overburdensome list. And as Alan says, it's guidance. But actually, when you look at it, many of the points mentioned on here already come up. Certainly, how should I put this, on the better planning applications that we get. Many developers are already including, I think, quite a lot of information on these things. I just think it's probably quite helpful for it to be in this format to concentrate their minds perhaps a bit on it. But yeah, I personally don't think it's asking too much of them. Anyone else? Yes, Councillor Butland.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm also in the health area. If we were having a planning application for Great Notley this evening, and we say access to unhealthy food, the developers built facilities, they built units. The units were subsequently filled sometime down the line. I'm just wondering, we've got something in there which is actually unenforceable, and are we just doing it? And unhealthy food to one person is not necessarily unhealthy food to everyone. And so I'd just like to tease that out a bit before we all say, oh yes, that's what it is. And of course, unhealthy food doesn't have to be just takeaway. You can have a little cafe or restaurant, which is very unhealthy.
Yes, Alan, do you want to come back?
Yeah, that issue was discussed quite extensively at the local plan examination, but it's important to really, when we're talking about hot food takeaways, we are just talking about hot food takeaways. I take the point that unhealthy food is not always a case of it actually being unhealthy. It's the amount of times a person consumes that food in a certain time frame, and also taking into account certain lifestyle factors, things like that, which can potentially affect certain people more than others. So we would, during a pre-application, encourage those. If there were going to be those sorts of uses proposed, then we would use this table as a way of trying to sort of mitigate those impacts as necessary, whether that is you can have your takeaway, but you would need to provide guidance to customers or something like that, or things like that. There are ways around it. it does have some weight, even though I've said it. Yeah, did just say it's guidance, but it is still attached to a local plan policy. So if they don't do, or if they don't do an HIA, then that could be a potential issue for an application. But we would obviously encourage everyone over every application over a certain size to actually undertake that exercise.
Right. Yeah.
And are we talking about unhealthy from a white British perspective? Or are we talking about foods for ethnic minorities, which may be unhealthy to some, but actually are part of a staple diet of ethnic minorities?
That's a good point.
I'll try my best at that one. There we go. When we're referring to unhealthy foods, we're talking about foods that are high in things like saturated fats, that are high in sugar, that are high in salt, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that would cover a number of dishes that are readily available, whether from a chip shop or whether from an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant. So this is just about looking at how those uses that can be sort of managed a little bit better to the benefit of the public in general. So yeah, I mean there are foods that are more healthy within those different types of groups. I think biryani is actually not that bad for you because it's primarily I think a rice dish, and when you have your fish and chips, the fish is actually pretty good for you, provided you don't eat the batter because it's poached fish. So there's different ways of looking at it, but it is an interesting point. But this is aimed at looking at the health of everybody, regardless of their sort of ethnicity or anything like that.
Never let it be said that this committee doesn't delve into the detail of what we're talking about. So I mean, we're not saying, are we, that when an application comes forward that there can't be hot food takeaways. And we wouldn't want to say that. I think, is it more the idea that we wouldn't want to see sort of 3 or 4 in a sort of an abundance of them?
Yeah,
is that it?
That's it. We wouldn't want. Well, I mean, there used to be a part of this policy that would talk about buffer zones, which is no longer in that policy, so there isn't that limit. It's just a way of just trying to look at possible mitigation measures for when you do have that kind of use. I mean, your typical sort of row of shops, they would have something like a chip shop in or something like that, but it's just making sure that there are ways of sort of mitigating that potential health impact, whether it's just having it so you can cycle there, or, as I said previously, just about having a bit more nutritional information available, just so people, can make more informed choices about their health. I mean, it should be noted, I think we are, as a district, do have certain obesity issues, particularly in younger children as well. I think we're above average in terms of that, so there is a potential issue there. It's not as bad as some areas, but it's just something that we're just trying to address through this policy and this guidance now. So.
Yes, I accept that last point. I think I don't know what our members feel. I think as long as we're happy that we're not saying there cannot be any hot food takeaways on a development, because clearly, you don't want to stop small businesses, and we do want to be able to give people a choice. As long as we're not saying we can't do it, I'm reasonably happy. Councillor Mrs. Parker, do you want?
Yes, just picking up the point. Are we saying in this policy that any application for a fish and chip shop has to be accompanied by a health impact assessment, covering all the points that are listed out there? It does seem to be a bit excessive for a small business.
That is established in the actual base policy itself, LPP 49, where it says for hot food takeaways, a health impact assessment will be required to be included in an application. It goes on to say where an unacceptable adverse impact on health is established, permission will not be granted. So you would have to do the guide. If you are proposing a hot food takeaway, then yes, you would have to do an HIA.
So that's already the case?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that we're not introducing anything new here in that respect. Right. Yes, Councillor Everard.
I'd not like to see this be an instrument to impose things, maybe from a committee or whatever, and take it too far.
Yeah, okay. I think perfectly reasonable points have been made, and as long as we're not saying we're going to be too draconian about this, then are we comfortable with that? Right. Okay. Any other comments from anyone? Right. We have. Just find it on page 5 of the agenda. 2 recommendations. 2.1 that the health and wellbeing impact assessment guidance in Appendix 1 is approved, or 2.2 that it is not approved. Could I have somebody to move, hopefully 2.1, please?
Madam Chair, I'm very happy to move 2.1.
Councillor Palliot, and a seconder? Somebody? Councillor Buckland, thank you. 2 members, that is, recommendation is approved. Oh, sorry, completely forgetting, we need to vote on it. Could I have a show of hands, please? Right. Thank you. Councillor Everard?
Yes, right.
Yes? Yeah, unanimous, thank you. Agenda item 6 is a sustainability statement guidance note, and this one is being presented by Gary. Slight technical hitch. We'll be there in a minute.
I'll just carry on without the presentation, I think. Okay, so we declared a climate emergency on July 2019 and pledged to support our communities to reduce the impacts of climate change across Braintree District. The pie chart, which is not on screen, and the graph was from page 7 of the adopted climate change strategy. And shows that housing comprises of 25% of carbon emissions in the district, and that industry and commerce emits a further 20% of carbon emissions. Around 50% of emissions are related to transport. That's transport of people and transport of goods. And also, over the last 17 years, transport has remained level while there are falls in both housing and commercial / industry. It's estimated that 75% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 are already built. That means that retrofitting existing buildings will need to be part of a future package of measures if we are to tackle our domestic carbon emissions. For 25% of the buildings that have not yet been constructed, local plan policies and decision-making in development management can make a difference by focusing on larger sources of household and employment building emissions. These are space heating, hot water heating, and the movement of goods and services. So those three things. So the local plan requires the submission of a sustainability statement to support planning applications. This is currently required for all planning applications, though it's not currently enforced. However, the sustainability statement guidance note, Appendix 1 of the report, will reduce the threshold to 1 or more new dwellings or 501 square metres of non-commercial floor space. This is because there are a lot of issues to deal with if we are to apply it to extensions and smaller commercial or non-commercial developments. Sustainability statement should demonstrate how development will be constructed according to local plan's principles of mitigating and adapting to climate change. It will summarise the sustainability credentials of development to decision makers while encouraging developers to consider building to a higher sustainability standard. This will be achieved through a set of assessment questions which test the performance of the development against a set of sustainability technical standards. The guidance note sets out a set of sustainable design principles. These are setting out a high energy hierarchy, i.e. be lean, be clean, be green. Setting out that the building orientation should take into account the direction of sunlight in winter months. That will help with natural heating. Setting out a fabric first approach and consideration of thermal bridging, such as use of non-conductive materials on the exterior fabric of the building. Setting out the approach to adaptable design, such as use of stud walls, so that buildings can be expanded internally without major construction works. Setting out consideration for embodied carbon during the construction process. And then the sustainability statement guidance notes further sets out chapters on energy efficiency, renewable energy and low carbon heat generation, climate change adaptation, green and blue infrastructure and sustainable movement. So high-level viability considerations have been taken into account while setting the minimum standards in the guidance note. The 2017 economic viability study factored in costs on top of development costs for the adopted Braintree local plan policies, and the minimum standards should result in no additional burdens. There is a fine balance to achieve while making the most progress towards net zero by 2050 and overburdening applicants with additional costs on development. The guidance note is guidance only, and there is a level of discretion for decision makers to apply. Furthermore, the NPPF, building regulations and local plan policies have set the bar for minimum standards, and this has resulted in higher standards being aspirational guidance only. It is envisaged that applicants can use the guidance note to clearly and concisely demonstrate to decision makers that development proposals have met exceeding or outstanding sustainability standards. Use of the checklist will make it easier for decision makers to see the sustainability standards of a development, which will be beneficial to applicants. The sustainability statement guidance note represents the first steps on the road to net zero by 2050. Future iterations or an SPD will feature higher standards which will be brought in over time. Initially, following national guidance, including the NPPF 2023 and secondary legislation for the Environment Act, whenever they are brought in and adopted. And adaptation of the assessment questions to respond to changing standards and to support feedback from applicants. The guidance note will be brought in alongside the local validation lists. Within this context, it should seek to reduce overlap and repetition, and it will be an iterative document. Taken together, officers will make recommendations below to allow minor changes to the guidance note. Do I need to read out the recommendations, Chair?
I can do that at the end if you like. What, the three recommendations?
Yes.
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Well, that concludes my report.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Can I just before I open this up, on page 28 it talks about quality review panel and says that for some larger developments and some developments in neighbourhood plan areas there will be a quality review panel report will be required. I'm taking it that that's something new, something we don't do at the moment, and would that form part of the pre-planning application stage?
Yeah, so quality review panels are a policy requirement now following the adoption of, for example, the Fearing Neighbourhood Plan. I believe Kelvin Neighbourhood Plan also requires a quality review panel. They are independent panel of, for example, architects, designers, landscape architects. One that quality review panel that is available to hire is based at Essex County Council, but we don't have to go with them. We can go with one based in London or one independently composed. For larger developments, it really does mean strategic scale developments, and it will be brought in as part of the pre-application process, and it will be part of the PPN.
Okay, so would it, I mean, is there a level, so would it apply for development, say 10 dwellings and over? What are the sort of criteria for it?
I do need to check the actual requirements in the Fearing Neighbourhood Plan, but initially I had thought it would have been for major scale developments, which is about 100 or so.
Okay.
But really in Fearing we're not really expecting anything beyond the Crown Estates development at this stage.
Right, okay, thank you. Right, question really, Councillor Mrs Scattergood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, it's all very well having a sustainability guidance when our local plan doesn't have the things in that we're trying to get people to do. At planning, when we say, can we have solar panels on the roof? Oh, it's not part of the planning policy. Can we get the developers to put the heat pumps in while they're building? Or it's not in our policy. Or water collection? No, that's not in our policy. So the guidance is all very well and good, but if we haven't got it in the local plan as a policy, the guidance is useless.
Okay, Gary, you'd like to come back?
Yeah, absolutely correct. It's unfortunate. We did have a policy in the local plan to require 10% on-site renewable energy generation. Unfortunately, the inspector did strike that out because it didn't comply with the national planning policy. So we are, I mean, the National Planning Policy Framework does say that we can produce an SPD as a council that will be subject to examination and consultation, and that could possibly bring in higher standards of sustainability, and that will help you bring in requirements that say, yes, you must install a heat pump, you must install renewable energy on site. But at the moment, we're trying to do the best we can with what we've got from national guidance and what's adopted in our local plan.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, it was certainly disappointing that the inspector struck that that requirement out. But we are. Right, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. This was in the national news today, and I despair actually at the lack of progress on this. Obviously, officers are doing their best, and it's a good document. But as Councillor Mrs Scattergood just says, we're caught between what we would like to do locally and what the government is actively preventing local authorities from doing. You know, what happens to local planning where we could draw up our own planning rules? Obviously, they have to be reasonable. They can't be unreasonable, but we can't. I've been going around a lot of the new housing estates recently because it's a certain time of year, and hardly any renewable energy to be seen. tiny gardens, clearly built to very car-dependent layouts, thin, struggling trees, when I know on these sites lots of the habitat that was there was removed by the developers. Obviously nothing as advanced, which would be wonderful, like underground rain storage tanks. We could have a leap forward in those, which could provide water for non-potable uses such as flushing toilets and use in gardens. There is so much more to be done, which we just seem to have one hand tied behind our back altogether. I know the government is saying they're going down more the route of building regs rather than planning, but personally I'd like to see both, so that we had more certainty about what we can do. And what it does is it does two things. It doesn't future-proof development, and not just housing but other types of development as well. And that of course means that we're not actually doing what we could do in terms of adaptation for climate change, but also, of course, it's not doing what we could do to keep customers' bills down, because of the much higher standards of insulation, having renewable energy, etc., and having stored water means you don't have to have those things coming in pipes and wires in the house so much, and you're keeping your costs down. So I'm having a bit of a moan fest, but it's not this council's fault, I know, but I shall continue to do so until the government gets off their what's it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I know it is a source of frustration at a planning committee that we aren't able to do or enforce more than we can. I mean, obviously, next item on the agenda is Water Resource Management Plan, which I think might provoke some discussion as well. Anyone else have a comment to make? No? Oh, yes, Councillor Mrs Parker.
Yeah, just a comment really. I think the checklist is quite helpful the way it's produced, and I think it will be quite helpful for applicants to see exactly what they're needing to provide, what information they're needing to provide. So I think that's it's a good way of going about it. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Abbott.
Sorry, just very briefly, there was one thing I did want to highlight as well. I did read the document this afternoon, and we had a brief look there at the pie chart, and I think we do need to focus on this issue of transport being not only the single largest contributor to emissions, but also the one that we're not making any progress on in the district. And I think that re-emphasises the need to do things differently. Obviously, you know my views on what transport spend should be, but it doesn't look as if that's coming down any time soon, but it could do if we had perhaps a more balanced view on where transport spend goes. And in particular, I would argue this idea of having safe off-road connected cycling and walking routes more. I know they're moving forward, especially in the towns, but if we had a more comprehensive system, I know people on a day like today aren't necessarily going to get on their bike. I wouldn't get absolutely soaked, but at the margin, people will be able to use them who are physically able to. And at the moment, it's a considerable barrier in a lot of the areas where we're getting some of the big housing developments around the villages that you can't safely cycle or walk to the nearest town, which might only by bike be 10 minutes away because the roads are too dangerous. So I think it is worth really keeping a focus on that. That is the one sector that's not shifting, it's staying high, transport.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I think we are making progress with cycling and so on. I appreciate it's probably not fast enough or not progressing enough that people would like to see. Gary, is there anything you want to come back on that at all?
Just that there's a movement hierarchy in the assessment questions for sustainable transport. And there's 3 points, and they ask questions of developers such as, is walking and cycling as well as public transport prioritised over private vehicle movements as a design principle, and is there space for cycle parking, changing and shower facilities? It's a nudge in the right direction. We were not the transport authority, and we can only do so much, and only for new development. And that this is, again, it's the first step on a long road towards net zero to 2050, and hopefully we can bring in more measures as time goes on.
Yeah, I think we have to keep pushing on it, albeit it is frustrating. All right, members, we have 3 recommendations on page 16 to approve the Sustainability Statement Guidance Note, Appendix 1, for use by decision makers in the consideration of planning applications of 1 or more new dwellings, to note that changes to NPPF 2023 and secondary legislation supporting the Environment Act 202, I think that should say 2022, shouldn't it? Both due to be published in 2023, could require reciprocal amendments to the guidance note, and to note that the Cabinet Member for Planning and Infrastructure, in consultation with the Head of Planning and Economic Growth, can make minor changes to the Sustainability Statement guidance note. Could I have somebody to move that, please? Councillor Karen,
Chairman.
the seconder. Anybody? Councillor Abbott, thank you. Can I show of hands, please? Thank you, members. That is unanimous. So now move on to agenda item 7, Water Resources Management Plan consultation, which Julie is going to take.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get the screen to share. This report is about the Water Resources Management Plan, and this would run from 2025 to 2050. I believe the report mentions it runs from 2029. It's actually 2025. This plan relates to drinking water only, which Anglian Water provides for most of the district. Whittam Silver.
Can you speak up a tiny bit more? I think I've got some members at this end who are.
Hello, I hope this one's better. Yeah, great. Shall I start again? Did anyone hear?
No, you're okay.
So Anglian Water provides drinking water for most of the districts except for Whittam Silver End and Riven Hall, which fall within the catchment of Essex and Suffolk Water. This plan is a statutory requirement on the water company and is reviewed, covers 25 years and is reviewed 5 yearly. In terms of planning responsibilities, the local planning authority are required by the NPPF to work with other bodies to assess the quality and capacity of infrastructure to ensure sufficient provision, and this of course includes drinking water. To that end, the Council commissioned the Water Cycle Study Update 2017 to support that, there is some this together with the infrastructure plan in 2017 and the update in 2021 also contain elements to do with water infrastructure also. And this supporting evidence base clearly showed that we have enough resources to cater for the growth in the local plan. Now, the NPPF responsibilities are reflected in local plan policy, and we have they show the local authority commitment to work with water companies and ensure that there is sufficient capacity, and to ensure that capacity is in place or secured prior to permission being granted. And there is a new requirement that new dwellings are fitted with more water-efficient fittings as standard. And that's the optional building regulations standard. And we also require that development is conducted in a manner which protects the environment from pollution. Now, the plan sets out how it calculates supply and demand in some detail and how it proposes to provide drinking water over the 25-year period. In doing so, it outlines the factors influencing the supply and demand. And in terms of supply, future regulation will permit less water to be extracted from the ground source. More water must remain in the environment to ensure that this groundwater resource remains sustainable and to protect wildlife and habitats. Reducing leaks adds to the amount of water available for use, and as leaks are reduced, so this additional source will also reduce. That has to be taken into account, and also the company has a drought plan which enables it to cope with a 1 in 200 year drought, and it is now moving to cope with a 1 in 500 year drought, and again that requires more water to remain in the ground to enable it to do so. Now, demand is expected to increase across the region, and also demand has remained high following COVID. It hasn't gone down to its previous levels. The plan describes the need to build in flexibility into its solutions to allow for the unexpected, and it seeks to adhere to its own net zero strategy as well, and seeks to build in a 10% gain for biodiversity into its proposals and the way it does things. And it also needs to take into consideration the impacts of its solutions on customers' bills as well. Possibilities for providing water includes reducing demand. So that would include possibilities such as the installation of smart meters, and these have been shown to reduce demand. These allow complex tariffs and leak detection, including in householders' houses, apparently. Also, they would consider the installation of water-efficient devices such as smart shower heads and other such devices. They're also looking at more sophisticated technology to be used in finding leaks, because as the more easily detectable leaks are found, they're then faced with finding ones which are more difficult. And for that, they're considering the use of acoustic technology and drones to detect such leaks. So, hard infrastructure will be required to provide the necessary amount of water, and these include 2 new reservoirs, one in Lincolnshire and one in the Fens, and work has begun on planning for these. Other solutions include reusing water from existing water recycling centres, and seawater desalination on the coast are also part of the proposals on a more long-term basis. Also, more pipelines to transfer water are another solution. The proposals outlined are at a high-level stage with the details not yet fully developed. The reservoirs and desalination plant and possibly the pipelines will be nationally significant infrastructure proposals to be determined by the Secretary of State. And other proposals such as the smart meters and and alterations to equipment are likely to be permitted development. However, Braintree District reserves the right to assess the proposals at a detailed stage as they come through. And that is the end of the presentation, committee.
Thanks, Julie. I would say I think that this item and actually the next one on storm overflow, which Julie is also going to present, are particularly topical issues at the moment. There is a lot in the media, and for those who watch Countryfile on Sunday evenings on BBC One, they recently had quite a long item on water resources, water management, particularly in relation to rivers and so on. So I think this is very relevant at the moment. Any comments or questions from members at all? Councillor Abbott.
Just briefly, obviously in this region we are already the driest, or you wouldn't think it today, but we are the driest part of the UK on long-term averages. Climate change is very likely to exacerbate that in the summer months. And so we've got diverging trends here of rapidly increasing population against the need to try and be more sustainable. That's the only comment I make on it. I mean, other than that, it seems a sensible proposal. My question is this incumbent on all water companies to do this? And therefore, and apologies if it's been published and I haven't spotted it, but does Essex and Suffolk Water have a similar plan which would come before us?
Yes, they do. They are all required to produce this plan, and to roughly the same timescale as well. There is a lot of information out there, and some of it is quite difficult to find sometimes.
So have they done that yet, or is that pending?
I haven't heard anything from them yet.
Right. Any about Councillor Butland?
Madam Chairman, is sort of similar to Councillor Abbott's. You mentioned Rivenhall, Silver End, etc. Is it a neat thing? Is it the same as the parish boundary? I suspect not. And what happens where they're not two separate water systems, are they? So what happens where they come together, and presumably that also applies to sewerage and that sort of thing as well. So it's really just following on. If they are supposed to be together or fairly close, it would be useful to be able to see them together, to see that they actually mesh and there are no gaps.
I get the impression that they are not neat, and that these water supply areas are, they depend. I think they depend on topography and geology, etc. And that's how they are drawn. They are in water resource zones that depend on as I said, the topography. Angling Water have provided lots of documents. It's more we tend to hear more from them than we do from the Essex and Suffolk Water Company. I can try, if it's useful, to try and get some material, visual material that I can send round.
I wonder, Madam Chairman, if we might, and we're fine with the recommendations here, but whether we might add to it a request for officers to contact Essex and Suffolk and ask when their plan is likely to be there, and also in the response to Anglia to ask what discussions they have with the neighbouring water supplier on the areas of potential overlap and boundaries.
I'm happy with that. So does that sound sensible?
That sounds sensible. I would say that the water companies are in constant contact with neighbouring water companies, because they have to plan for water distribution. And at the moment, we get there are water transfers into this area from various places, and that involves negotiation and talks. And I believe that there is a a regional body which comprises of a group of groups of water companies which conduct kind of high-level planning and discussions.
That's fine. I think if we can add some wording to that effect, as suggested by Councillor Butland, to the recommendations here, I think that would be good. It just firms it up a bit. Yeah. Councillor Abbott.
Yes, exactly. I agree with that. And just to say, in our area, which I'm familiar with, where Essex and Suffolk Water are the potable water suppliers, Anglian Water are the sewage and statutory sewage undertakers. So it's sort of almost like the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Everard.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. We mentioned reservoirs, building more reservoirs. On a lot of the large developments, we do have balancing ponds and that. Now, I suppose it's far too complicated to try and use any of that, but it's just a thought. Thanks.
Julie or any officer, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, that's true. One of the possible solutions is the reuse of water from existing water recycling centres, and one of the elements of that is that they would like the centres which are chosen to have water bodies beside them, or possibly made. I don't know. They haven't developed that idea that much at the moment, but the idea is that there would be sort of areas of water beside it that the processed water would lie in until it's ready to be used, and before being sent on its way. So that would that cover part of what you were considering?
It's just that there's all these areas, and they're not used. They just overflow into the rivers, and just seems.
Yeah, Councillor Abbott.
Well, I think with the balancing ponds, it's an interesting idea, but I think the problem you have is that they're often that water is quite polluted. It depends where it's, but certainly they're going to build a whole load of them for the A12, and they've told us they will be polluted. And there's an issue then of how you might be able to reuse that water and bring it back for human use, as opposed to the poor wildlife which lands on it and doesn't realise how polluted it is. But so I think that's the issue: is how would you treat it if you were going to? You might be able to use it for grey water.
Well, yes.
That's a possibility.
Yes, yeah. I think that's probably a point that Councillor Mrs. Scattergood was going to make about how we treat it. But I think things are evolving all the time with this. So maybe there'll be something in the future that can be done. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was quite impressed with Anglia Water this summer, actually, because obviously we've had the driest summer for absolutely ages, and I think we were the one area in the country that didn't have a hosepipe ban, which was quite impressive. And I think it's probably due to the transfer of water from other parts of the country, particularly from the Ouse, isn't it? And but I'm just a bit surprised that Anglia Water are even considering desalination, which is a very expensive option and requires a huge amount of energy. So the only, but basically broadly happy with the comments. I just was wondering why the officers have decided not to make a comment about compulsory metering.
The reason for not putting that in was that in terms of planning controls, we wouldn't have the control over that under the local plan and the planning policies. Again, that's something that would be of interest to the council on a wider basis.
So the question is, do you support us implementing compulsory metering? I'm just, if we think it's a good idea, why would we not say yes? We do support you implementing it. That was my question.
I did not want to put down support or mention the compulsory metering, because I felt that was something which, in planning terms, wasn't really within the area that we would normally control or express opinions on, and also being aware that was something which may or may not be supported by committee.
Okay, I can see both sides of the argument. I mean, perhaps you just feel it ties us down too much at this stage and doesn't allow for some planning reasons. I don't know how better to... Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Okay. All right. Any other comments from anyone? Yes, Councillor Mrs. Gadsden.
It's nothing to do with this as such, but if you run a business and use a lot of water, you can buy it from anyone now. I actually buy my water from Scotland for my business in Colchester. And how it works, I do not know.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
They are the cheapest. So, yes, right. So if you use a lot of water and you're a business, you can shop around now. It started 2 years ago.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay.
It comes down the same pipe as Anglia Water supplied.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've had a good discussion on this. So the recommendations set out on page 58, I'll just read the first one, 2.1, which is the officer responses set out below in the agenda are noted and sent to Anglian Water in response to their consultation, with the addition of some wording to pick up the points made by Councillor Butland around water companies talking to each other and us talking to them and how they confer with each other. If we can.
And getting a plan.
Oh, and yes, and getting the plan for Essex. So, are you happy with that, officers? You got that comment noted, right? If members are happy with that, can I have somebody to move that recommendation? Councillor Mrs. Scattergood, second. Councillor Abbott, a show of hands, please. It's unanimous. Thank you. All right, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you. No, that's all right, Councillor Scattergood. Thank you very much. Right, we will move on to item 8, storm overflow consultation, and back to Julie again, please.
Thank you, Chair. This plan was submitted for consultation in February 2023, finishing on March the 3rd, and comments have been sent, and these are set out in section 2 of the report. And I would say in paragraph 1.195, it mentions consultation carried out in 2020, and there was another one in 2022 as well. Storm overflows are part of the sewage network, which acts as a safety valve in combined sewage and surface water sewers. When the network is overwhelmed, mixed sewage and water is discharged to receiving waters, which can be rivers, lakes or sea. The report states that the use of these has increased in recent years through population growth, increased paved areas and more frequent heavy storms. Such discharges can release raw sewage, which can be harmful to public health, and they can also include pollutants, microplastics, nutrients, heavy metals and litter, all of which are harmful not only to public health but to the environment. As I mentioned in the previous presentation, the NPPF requires local authorities to work with other bodies to ensure there's sufficient infrastructure capacity to accommodate growth, and again this includes the wastewater system as well. And again, I mentioned the local plan evidence base, the water cycle update and the infrastructure delivery plan report in 2017 and its update. And again, these are reflected in the local plan. So we've got Part 1 and LPP 70, which is particularly relevant here as it seeks to protect the environment from pollution. Since the plan has been to examination, the Environment Act 2021 has been issued. And this places a legal duty on water companies to reduce the impacts of the discharges from storm overflows, such that by 2050 no storm overflow will be permitted to operate outside the unusually heavy rainfall, nor can it be allowed to cause ecological harm. 3 regulatory authorities involved, DEFRA, Ofwat and the Environment Agency. Over 2020, the water industry regulators have acted to set in motion plans and actions to reduce stormwater overflows. This plan, which we're looking at tonight, is Anglian Water's response to the regulators' requests. Included is some information relating to Braintree District. Monitoring equipment is being installed to assess the scale and nature and location of the problems. These are placed on various parts of the network and remain in place for at least a year to provide data to inform action. Within Braintree District, monitoring has commenced on around 21 sites. Most of these are within their latter stages of monitoring, and further locations are due to have equipment installed, a lot of them by December this year. And that is the end of the brief presentation.
Thank you, Julie. I just refer to my remark at the start of the previous item, which is this is something which is receiving a lot of attention at the moment. And I'm pleased to see with question 2, when we're asked, do we have any preference on which high priority areas should be met first? And our response is high priority should be given to rivers and bathing waters. I absolutely agree with that. And I don't think I'd be wrong in saying not just Anglia Water, but other water companies. I think there is room for improvement in this area. Members, any comments? Councillor Abbott?
Could we include tributaries of rivers as well? Or has it already been sent?
Tributaries are included, yes.
They're included,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Obviously this is a very serious issue in this country, and again, the government's failures on this are writ large. I mean, there's stories every single day about this, and unfortunately it's not a pleasant subject, but it's not just what you might expect to come out of sewage farms and pumping systems. It's also solid hygiene waste as well. There was something about this on, slicks of the stuff on beaches and on tidal waters, and absolutely appalling. And the idea that, we're going to get rid of most of it by 2050, well, terrific. That's another nearly 30 years of this happening. One of the problems, though, to be fair to the industry, is this issue of huge amounts of surface water getting into the sewers. So we've got a particular problem in Silver End with this, and there's some work being, I don't know if officers are aware, there's some work currently being undertaken in the Western Lane area, which we've been asking for a long time, to put a new, quite significant capacity pipe in to bypass where that is worst case where it's happening. But I have on numerous occasions been called out to residents to see what's in their front garden, which has come out of the drainage systems. I mean, it's appalling. So it is a crisis in this country which has to be dealt with. I don't think we're moving anywhere near far enough. I talked to Anglian Water a lot on this, actually, because of the Silver End issues in particular, and they admit to me that they are trying to catch up all the time with the amount of housing being built. They obviously have a statutory obligation to connect. They can't not connect. But while we and other authorities are busy giving all these thousands of planning permissions, they are struggling to keep up with the pressures that that's creating. So again, the government are failing to put two and two together and come up with a sensible solution, which is 4 and not -10 or whatever the latest answer they come up with from their calculations. Unless we have a comprehensive way of dealing with this, particularly in high growth regions like ours, we're going to be in trouble for a long time. I was just interested, my one question is, when it says storm overflows, is this referring to just sewage treatment works, or is it referring to other sources of overflow as well? Because I noticed Silver End actually wasn't in the list of places where this was happening.
It relates to the infrastructure around the storm overflows. So there might be leaks and aging infrastructure that needs installed, and the appendix 1 includes the addresses, but there are also references to storm tanks and the monitoring equipment on the sewer network itself. So it's not just on the actual tank itself. So if they're thinking that it's contributing to the problem, then they're going to be trying to monitor it.
Thanks. So I'm not sure that actually this is even fully comprehensive, but yes, in terms of the monitoring gauges, I can vouch for the fact they are put them in, because we have the pleasure of this. The main sewer from Silver End goes under my garden. Should I declare an interest? 12 feet down, there's a manhole cover as well, and the gentleman was going. I don't envy these chaps. The gentleman was going down the manhole cover, and there's a little ladder down there to fit a monitor. So they are putting monitors on that because they are worried. He told me that is one of the parts of the network they're worried about. And then it comes back to the fact that there's so much extra housing going in the area. So all we can hope and press for as an authority is the infrastructure improvements get in as fast as possible, I suppose.
Councillor Butland.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think Councillor Abbott raises a very reasonable issue. I listened to any questions, the radio version, not the television one, a fortnight ago, and was interested that Carolyn Lucas, the Green MP, was saying the fault was the government had not built enough houses. And if those statements are being made by the very same people who are saying, we've got a problem, it is something that does have to be talked through. So I'm very sympathetic to the comments that Councillor Abbott's made.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, I obviously agree with everything everybody said. Is obviously a very serious issue. The only comment I would say is on the response. I think I know you've mentioned rivers, but it was definitely rivers with the context of bathing and wild swimming and all the rest of it. But obviously, it's important for the wildlife that live in the rivers, the fish, and all the other organisms that live in the rivers. And I just want to say, I also had a very interesting report on the radio about a trial that Southern Water are doing on the Isle of Wight, where they have installed for every household something called a leaky, written this down here, a slow draining water butt, and apparently it's reduced in every house, 1,000, doing a trial in 1,000 houses, it has reduced the volume of water going into to the sewers by 70%, because what it's doing is slowing down the rate of water going into the sewers up, and I think they were amazed at what a difference such a small intervention like that could make.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, just following on from your point, Councillor Parker, about rivers and the environment. Again, it was on Countryfile, and other programmes are available. On Sunday, I think it was on the River Wye, sections of which are dying, and there's actually an amazing group of volunteers who are pulling together to try and reverse the damage that's being done. And it's a river which is, well, all rivers are important, but particularly rich in wildlife and marine life, and it's struggling desperately. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Abbott.
Yes, briefly. If you can demonstrate to Anglian Water, and from personal experience, again, declaring the interest, this affects us and my home, that you are not discharging any surface water to the sewer, you can get a discount on your bill. And maybe that should be another thing they could incentivise, is if people can use water for their garden or for whatever, washing a car, but not putting it down the drain, having diversion and catchment systems, you can actually reduce your bill as well.
Oh, well, that's very helpful to know. Right. Thank you. Julie, is there anything you want to come back on, or do we think we've covered everybody's comments?
I think that's everything. Thanks.
Okay. Good. I think that was very useful discussion. So the recommendations are set out on page 65, and it's basically that the following response to Anglian Water be noted as set out below, and then it's in the agenda, the questions and our responses. So this is for noting. Is everybody happy to do so? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Right. That takes us on to item 9, urgent business. We have none, either in public or private session, so I can close the meeting at 7:16. Thank you very much indeed.